Resume recording. Okay, so the session will be recorded just for your reference. So in this session, what I'll be covering is a quick introduction to myself and where the session is coming from. And then we'll get started with what data-driven decision-making is and where infographics play a role and data communication play a role. Then the third thing we'll cover is what an infographic is. So just discussing how do I differentiate between an infographic versus, I'm sure you've seen data viz or other types of data visualizations. Then the fourth bit we'll cover is on information processing. And this is quite important, especially as data people, often we focus on the data elements, but actually just the considerations we need to make around how, as humans and users of data, we process information, and this influences how we need to present information. Then we'll talk about creating an infographic and the steps that you could follow to actually create an infographic yourself. And then lastly, I'll share a few infographic use cases. And during this, please feel free to drop any comments within the chat. And there will be pause points when I will allow questions or inputs as well. So that is the overview. So just in terms of who I am, so I'm Jerusha Govender, and I'm South African. I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa, and that's where I'm presenting from. I'm also the director and co-founder of Data Innovators, which is an organization I started as a small business in 2015, and we've since expanded and have a bigger team since this year. And my expertise is in M&E, which is monitoring and evaluation. So I come from working in development sectors. So it's been well over a decade that I've worked within health sector and education and other sectors as well, focusing on helping organizations understand how do you measure the outcomes or the impact of an intervention. And through that experience, I've built my expertise as a data creative. So really being able to process information and package it in a way that is useful to the organizations I've worked with. And in 2019, I was the winner of the Vule Kamali competition for data viz, where I used open source education data, budget data, to present the relationship between the South African spend and budget, as well as what kind of education outcomes we were seeing. And so, as I mentioned already, I've worked in the development space, so that's my expertise really from a public sector that I'm sharing how we've used infographics and the model that we've gone with, largely for working with helping decision makers in public sector utilize data. And I've just shared my academic background there as well. I actually come from a science background. So I'm a scientist at heart but also a creative. And so have developed my skills in my master's in public health and public and development management. So as I share and as I move on to the next bits, please also do introduce yourself in the chat so I have a sense of who has joined us. So you can share your name, your organization, if you're with an organization or university, as well as the country, just so that everyone else gets to know who's part of the session as well. So in terms of the infographics component, so the infographic session that I'm introducing to you today is really part of a program that we offer, and we call this program Data Artistry. And so we're drawing from that content that I'm introducing to you. And what we talk about when we talk about data artistry, it's really the skills around data communication. And in our work, we've tailored our content to help build these skills for professionals in the development space, but this also cuts across more private sector areas as well. And we've offered this content through university programs in South Africa at the University of Witwatersrand. We've also introduced components of this program at Gimper in Ghana, where it was part of the M&E program. And so to date, there's been over 150 individuals that are part of development sector that have seen a component of data artistry in various forms, and you are now a broader group as well that has been introduced to the infographic component of it. So to get started, as I mentioned, I'm going to take you through these kind of 6 steps. We've covered the introduction. And the first bit to think about when we talk about how we're going to use infographic is that actually there's a purpose to it, that infographics is part of data communication. And actually, data communication is about a bigger need. And that need is that in private and public sector, we need to become, or organizations need to become data-driven, because being data-driven allows us to utilize insights to make better decisions, to operate in a better way, and to see if we're actually achieving the goals that we need to. So this is the first focus I want to look at. And thank you for the introductions in the chat that I see coming through. If you've not done so, please continue to share who you are. So that's your name, organization, and country, so we have a sense of who's joined. Great. So getting started with that. So in terms of what data-driven means and why this is important to understand before you even create the infographic, is that data-driven organizations more and more realizing that there's actually a value in your data beyond just gathering these different insights. And that if you present data meaningfully, or it provides more real-time and actionable information, but it also allows organizations to then identify problems quickly, come up with solutions, and you get basically service and more feedback on the work that we're doing. And of course, we need data for that, but we also need a way of communicating that data in order for it to be useful. And so far in my experience, and possibly in your own experience, you've also seen that there's not many organizations that are really successfully adopting a data-driven culture, that we are going from collecting data, analyzing it, to utilizing it. That often we kind of get stuck at the point of the collation and analysis, but the so what is missing. And we know that there are more and more organizations that are aspiring to this. So the skills to be able to move from analysis to communicating is becoming quite critical, and a value add to the role of an M&E professional, a data analyst, or anyone that needs to engage with data in the public and private sector. So at this point, I want to pause just to get your inputs as well, because being data-driven is kind of at the core of why we need to talk about using tools like infographics or like data visualization. So in the chat, I want to just I'll give you a few seconds to share what you think stops organizations from being data-driven. And I mean, communication is one element, but perhaps you can share others that you feel are kind of blockers to moving from analyzing it to utilizing it. I'll give you a few seconds and you can put that in the chat. Okay. So I see a point that they don't necessarily have the skills, or they don't have the tools to work with data. Okay. We'll give an opportunity for one, resources and time. Ignorance about data-driven change. Yes, not. Okay. Excellent. You can keep sharing your thoughts on that. And I think these are quite aligned, that yes, often the inhibiting factors to get to actually, we have this culture of gathering, using, analyzing, and actually making a change in an organization based on your data. Some of this is related to, firstly, the data does not exist. Perhaps it's not, or it's not available. So it may exist, but accessing it or having the right skills to access it is limited. As we see, they may be resources, or perhaps it's a time factor, or they are under-resourced. Thank you, Daniel. And there are also cases of that they don't understand the data benefits, that it's like, actually, we're doing the work, we're getting the funds to operate, that is enough, but there's actually more value. Perhaps you could do a lot better if you understood the insights from your data. There's the lack of knowledge, skills, and resources that's been shared. There's a cultural resistance. So we've never needed to use the data. We've never needed to create infographics. Why must we do it now? Let's stick to our old school Excel spreadsheets. Or there's siloed work, that perhaps there are spaces where data is being used in a certain way and others that they are not. So these are common kind of underlying problems where introducing data communications and infographics is quite important. By using communication tools such as infographics or using storytelling techniques, it's just one way that you can kind of drive a data-driven culture, because it allows you to, one, package data so that it is available, because sometimes availability means it's available in a database, but my drawing insights is almost impossible for me because I'm not able to utilize the data. So packaging it in a way makes that data available to the users of it. By packaging it in a simple way also makes it more understandable, and linking that data to the story then kind of really helps users of data to see actually what is the meaning of this data, how do I utilize it in my work, what's the specific change. So packaging it allows that pieces to come together. It also allows you to then simplify things in a way so that you don't necessarily need advanced skills to interpret it, because you've packaged it in a way that really makes it easy for me as perhaps a layperson, a non-data person, to comprehend what your report, what your analysis is trying to tell. And in some ways, I mean, cultural resistance needs a bit more than just storytelling, but because by introducing infographics as a novel tool also allows you to start breaking kind of those barriers where there's a resistance because data use is often assumed is based on a spreadsheet, a detailed projection, whereas there are other ways of sharing information. And it also allows the ease of sharing information, so that you also break down those silos by making sure that different departments, different organizations have access to information in a means that is much easier to assimilate. So that's the underlying driver of why to use infographics. And so because we know data communication can enable a data-driven culture, infographics is a tool to do so. And I'm just going to spend some time on what exactly an infographic is, because there are many tools that can change a data-driven culture, and this is just one. So I'm going to pause here for a moment, and I want to get a sense, because often when we talk about infographics, we use, I've seen words like, I use the word data communication, there's data visualization, data presentation, infographics, infograms. What do you think this image is? So I'm just going to summarize what you're seeing. Do you think this is a data visualization and an infographic? So you can also put that in the chat. What you're seeing here, it's quite outdated data right now, but it's a presentation of global fertility rates. And what it is giving us, you'll see there's an icon of a mom, a pregnant mom, and it's got the projected number of children per woman. And it's giving me a summary of the projected number between different time periods, which is at the bottom, you'll see on the x-axis over here. And it's quite an aggregate view. So based on this, what would you say this is? Is this a data visualization or is this an infographic? Or you can also say, I don't know. That's also an acceptable response. Okay, so there's a bit of, I don't know. There's some saying data visualization, and I say, so I'm glad that there are differences in the response. No idea. Okay, so in fact, this is a data viz. It's a visualization. It's not an infographic, and I'll explain to you in a moment why. Often when we think infographic, we think that it's anything that's got some design in it, because I see it's got nice fonts, nice color, and it's got these icons with a mom and the heart in the middle. That in fact it must be an infographic. But that's common. It's a common misinterpretation of what an infographic is. A data visualization is usually when I'm purely presenting the data for you to then explore. An infographic is something where I'm presenting it to you, but I've already given you the insight. I'm telling you what it means. When I look at this data, it's giving me this projected number of children over time. So it is visualizing data because I'm seeing quite aggregate information, but it's not telling me what to do with it. It's not telling me what the insight is. Is this good? Is it bad? Should I change something? It's also such an aggregate view that, you know, is this the same for Ghana versus South Africa? The time periods are quite aggregate. So it's purely providing some information for me to then ask more questions, for me to go investigate more. And often a data viz is useful, but in the case of infographics, we're often using it really to help part of that driving the data-driven culture where we want to help you make the decision. So I want to make it easier for you to move from what does this mean to, oh, I know what to do with the data. I'm going to show you another one now. So based on what I've just shared, this is another info. Now I'm giving you the answer. So this, what I wanted to ask is for you to share whether you think this is a data viz and infographic, but I'll jump right in that this is an example of what an infographic is. And you may wonder, okay, so what was the difference between what I just saw? It also looked quite nice with nice colors and things. But the main difference you'll see is that the structure of this image that I'm sharing, it starts with a statement at the beginning. It says, women and HIV, did you know? Question mark. And then underneath it, there is some data viz. So these elements such as the icon matrix here, there is also a horizontal bar chart. This is data viz incorporated into an infographic. And for each one of them, this data point is very relevant to the topic at the top. So it's saying around 1 in 4 people living with HIV is a woman. Not all women are equally affected. Only about half of the women living with HIV have achieved viral suppression. And this is 2018 data, so it's purely for the depiction, but the data itself is most likely more up to date. And at the bottom, you'll see it says, get the facts, get tested, get treatment, and then you can get more information at the bottom. So the infographic you'll see is actually a more guided tool. It's telling me at the bottom, it's already given me the question. So whereas the previous one, I was left coming up with the questions. I was like, so what does this mean for South Africa? So what does this mean elsewhere? Whereas here it's telling me, did you know these things? And it's then providing me the answer. So it's really guiding me as a reader to pick up what is the key thing. It's even pointing out who the key audience is. So they're making women up at front. We know the topics on HIV. There's no necessary need to explore. If I wanted to break down the diagnosis things, then I could possibly get more info in the link. So it's also allowing me as maybe a more technical data analyst that wants more information to know where to go for more info. But perhaps as the woman that it's targeting, it's already telling me what to do. It's saying, this is the case. There are some issues here. So go get tested, get the information, get the treatment. And if you want more information, you can go here. So it's very clearly structured to guide you as to this is what I want you to be thinking about. And this is what I want you to do at the end. So that's the clear differentiator between a data viz and an infographic. So in summary, when we talk about a data viz or visualization is something that's inviting exploration. It's saying, here's a little bit, but you need to go investigate a bit more. Or you need to ask questions. And often a data viz is helpful in a more detailed report. In a dashboard, we use data viz often, or if you're presenting data to a technical team where you need to generate exploration, then data viz is still useful. And so usually it's delivering a data point, it's presenting it still in an effective way, and it also allows you to start looking at certain points of analysis, and allows you to remember certain key points that you want to investigate as well. By comparison to an infographic presents a key perspective or a piece of information. So it may allow a bit of exploration, but upfront, it should be guiding the decision maker or the user as to what I want you to see. So usually infographics may still be helpful to a programmatic team, but often you want to use infographics when it's going to a decision maker. Because if you think about it, if you're presenting your data to a policy maker, to the CEO, the executive, these are people with limited time. They're not always, I mean, there are a few that may be very analytical, but often they need to make decisions based on key points. And so your data needs to be packaged in a way where, as the analyst, you've identified, actually, these are the key things that I need you to take home and think about or action on. And then the rest you can get in the detailed report or here's the dashboard. So it should be delivering a story. It should take the audience through a journey, and it should also be visually appealing. So the design is still important in infographic. Okay, so I see there's a comment in the chat about this. So what I'm getting is that the infographic is self-explanatory, whereas the data viz tickles one's curiosity on the subject. Is that right? Yes, perfect. I like that. So yes, it's tickling the curiosity, whereas the infographic should be a little bit of spoon feeding. It's saying, I want you to see this point. I don't want you to go hunt for it. Thanks, Linda. So kind of now when you look at an infographic like this, hopefully you'll see it in a different lens. You'll be able to pick up, this is actually, am I creating a visual data viz, or am I creating an infographic? And for this session, we're focusing on actually, it's about using infographics, and infographics have a specific purpose. This is just an example of a more detailed infographic. And you'll see that again, there's definitely a design element here. There's certain color, there are certain types of elements that are being used, and the structure as well. What is quite clear is that they have used design to provoke emotion as well. So it's like big, bold Ebola statement at the back, at the top, and then I follow a journey through. So it takes me, unfortunately, the details are not very explicit, but it takes me through a journey of, and you'll see they've used headings such as a rising toe, unprecedented size, transmitted disease, global reach. Within the text, the key message is also there. So this is really targeted at a more kind of technical or programmatic audience. This is not necessarily something, an infographic for a public audience, because you do require a little bit more of kind of in-depth look at it, or perhaps a funder to see, okay, what is the significance of our funding? Are we seeing a change? So that's one sample of a detailed infographic. And when we do talk about infographics, there are various forms of infographics, and they should be driven, as I'll explain to you, by the audience, and the audience then informs what the message is. And there are different kind of formats that you would go with. You could go with one, either a visual article, which is similar to the one that I just shared. They are list-based, where you're visualizing a group of things, such as a method, a sequence of events. There are data visualizations. So some of these are an infographic as a whole, or elements of an infographic. You get ones that are very intensely statistical or data viz. You also get visual resumes, so describing an individual or project. There are processes, maps, flow charts. You may have a comparison. You may have timelines, and there are also interactive ones. So some of the tools that I'll share with you, you can experiment with and see what are some of the more interactive type infographics that you can utilize. So that's what an infographic is. So then on to the next point that we said, you know, infographics are really important because they help drive a data-driven culture. And we know, secondly, that they are different to data viz, and so they have a specific purpose in how they must be used and why we'll use them. Then the other thing is that actually, when I do design an infographic, I do need to think about how people process information, because that influences how I create my infographic. So to understand why and how to use an infographic, we must understand how we assimilate information as humans. So the key things to think about as you create your infographic, so before we go through the practical steps of that, is that it's important to remember that the person using your information is a human being. It's not another you, it's not another technical person. It's somebody that may be, you know, a doctor, it may be a teacher, it may be a manager, or somebody that's maybe not necessarily sitting and analyzing data constantly. And the key things to understand about that person and even ourselves is that, which influences how you create an infographic, is that as humans, we are symbolic thinkers, firstly, which means that when we look at information, we seek meaning. And I'm not meaning just data. I'm talking about when I look at my outdoors, when I look at posters, we are constantly looking at symbols that then tell us about meaning, color, shape, emotions, that all influences what I take home in an infographic. Secondly, humans use visual perception. So our brains are structured to almost bypass, we've learned certain things to bypass some of our assimilation. So if I see things clustered together, I make assumptions about it being a group. No one tells me it's a group. I assume that there must be something similar, or there must be a reason why those are associated. Or by seeing certain parts of shapes, my mind will complete the shape. Seeing multiple squares, I'll make an assumption that it's a whole. And then lastly, there's our memory. We also remember certain things. And I'll show you an example shortly, that visualization or visual elements play a big part in what we recall long term. And so hence it plays a key part in how we visualize and what we visualize. So I'm going to do a series of experiments for you to get a sense of what this means and why it's important in how you create your infographic. So let's go to symbolic thinkers. So let's do something fun. Again, you can use the chat. So I'm going to allow you to have a look at this image, and I want you to share in the chat what is the first thing that stands out to you when you look at this picture. And so these are one of these like visual kind of perception tricks. What stands out for you in this picture? So maybe I'll start while you're sharing in the chat. Definitely, I see a couple looking into each other's eyes. That's what stands, an old couple that's looking into each other's eyes. Does anyone see anything different? What's the first thing? Or maybe you didn't even see the old couple. Okay, two people looking at each other. Who sees something different? You're like, actually, that I did not see the old couple. I saw something else. Okay, so there's lots. Oh, nice. So some is saying, I see a man playing a guitar to a woman. I see younger versions of themselves. I see the lady with the load and the musician with the car, and a man playing an instrument. I see two people looking at each other. Oops. Now I lost my chat. Okay, great. I see a lady peeping through a doorway. Okay. Okay, lovely. So I do see at least people are seeing different things. And so what that is just showing that actually, and then there's somebody that sees a bottle. Always people see different, unique things. Some people see a bottle, some people say it's an earring. But the point is that as humans, or what you've seen now, is that we each see different things. We each seek meaning in what we've seen in a different way. And we already probably started creating some stories that maybe there was, there's a romantic story behind this couple. Or maybe the person in the door is, somebody evil whispering into the man's ear. We create stories based on just a visual element. And that is important because we do the same when we look at data. We do the same when we look at infographics, and we start making assumptions about what this means, what is more important. And when we create an infographic, you almost want to guide you want to make sure that if I wanted you to see the bottle, that bottle should be quite dominant, because that is important, that it shouldn't be the item that is secondary or something that I want you to go through a lot of text to find. It should be very clear and the first symbol that you see. So that's the first one. And then moving to the second, and then I'll move a bit quickly. The second bit is memory, that as humans, we have different kind of stages of memory, and there's our iconic memory, our visual working memory, and long-term memory. And when you create an infographic, we really want to harness that iconic memory. Iconic memory is where you as a human don't need a lot of time to look at it, but you will always remember it. So it means that in an infographic, if you're the policymaker, I need you to make a decision, or I need you to utilize this data and think about what's the right decision. I need to package it in a way that it doesn't take much time. It allows you to immediately be able to pick up, this is the key point. Okay, I get how I need to action. Whereas visual working memory and long-term memory requires a bit more time. So long-term memory is the extreme, which if you think about a journal article, I need to read a journal article maybe twice or 3 times before I really get what I need to do with it. And so an infographic mustn't be that kind of level of effort. So another quick experiment before we move on is one here. So I want you to take a moment and look at this picture. I'll give you a few seconds, and then I'm going to ask you some questions to see how your memory works. Okay, you can just kind of wander your eyes around the pic. Okay, so I gave you a few seconds there, and now I've got some questions for you. First, who can tell me what the color is of the traffic light? Great.
Red.
Red. Excellent. So that's an easy one. This is an example of iconic memory. No matter where you go in the world, if you see a red robot, you know what to do. Well, assuming you're able to see the color red, but no one needs to ever tell you what that means. If I saw it once, it's quite simple. But now let's ask the next question. In which direction can you not turn? Right. Okay, got it. Yes, you can't turn right. Some of you might have been like, oh, I didn't spot that. But again, it's a symbol, so it was easier to remember and it was closer in the image. So let's ask the harder questions. How many phone numbers were on the white van? Okay. And maybe the others were also brave. 4. Okay. And do you know what the first city name was on the white van? No. Okay. So I'll go show you. So there were 3 phone numbers and the first city is Heathrow. And the point here is that, of course, the placement of the robot, the signage makes it easier for me to recall that. And so again, when we think about our designing of the infographic, we need to make, okay, I see one person was able to recall that. Good for you. It means that you just have excellent memory or excellent picture recall. So often when we create an infographic, the way we package information, the important stuff must be like the red robot. It needs to be, you looked at that for 10 seconds and you would definitely remember that and you'll remember this for a while. But the less important information should be the ones that are in the distant or the ones that are kind of secondary. So I'm going to move quickly because we do, just to manage time. But then the last bit is also considering visual perception, which is really around how we group info. And I'm just sharing that in this case, they've used things like bar charts for scale. So I make assumptions that, okay, without looking at the number, I know that a bigger bar means more. By looking at the shading, I know that that's showing me something about proportion and direction. So my visual perception is allowing me to make assumptions around what this means. So I'm going to get started so that we can move to, you can see what the model is and quickly show you a case. So based on this kind of creates what underpins how you create an infographic. And I'm going to share a model that we use for thinking about the infographic. This is really an introduction to the model, and I'm happy to share some resources so you can spend more time on it. And this model on creating an infographic, the acronym we use is CCIED, to remember it, which is number 1. When you create an infographic, you must choose. You need to make the right choices based on how you understand people assimilate information and how your audience specifically needs to get the right message. So how am I going to make that story quite clear? And maybe things also around the data that you choose. Is everything important and only key things? Number 2 is that you create. So only after you make the choices do you actually start building. This is where you look at what's the right medium for my infographic. If you need to make it interactive, there are certain tools you use for that. If it needs to be a presentation, then it needs to be in the PowerPoint kind of dimensions. And then you go into improve. So improve is like, how do I use some of these other elements that I know influences how I recall information, how I symbolize information to improve it. And then lastly, you emphasize. It's like, actually, so now have I really made my key message that I started with and considered my audience in the right way so that my emphasis is placed on the right point. And then lastly, you deliver. So it's actually, how do I then present this back? How do I ensure it gets to the person that needs? So I'm going to zoom, I'm going to go into each one, and some of them will spend more time than the others. So firstly, when we talk about choose is really that when you're creating your infographic and using infographics, you must make sure that you understand the context. It's lovely to create things that are beautiful, but if they're not useful, then it's defeated the purpose of a beautiful infographic. And so that's why this step is quite critical. Starting with firstly, knowing who your audience is. Who is this person or persons that's going to read this? Secondly, what is the message? So like the women and HIV, what is that kind of red robot or key statement that you want the individual to know or take home? And then lastly, what's the right data for this? So now that I know who I'm presenting to, I can start making choices around what data to include and not include. So this is just kind of a stock image of a group. And what we usually do is, and I want you to kind of think about when you're creating an infographic, is that before you do this, you kind of imagine who are the people that are going to click download. So for example, these are a group of stakeholders that are about to click download on your report or on your email so that they can access the report. Each of them have different expectations. Maybe Nomsa, was the CEO on the left-hand side here, wants to see actually what's the outcomes of an intervention. How much have we spent? Did we hit the bottom line? Versus Jacques, who's perhaps the funder of the initiative, is asking questions around, actually, what's the return on investment? Will I continue funding this initiative? What are some of the lessons around that? And you might have some more analytical people at the back who are like actually talking about, what is the key trend? How would we change this intervention? So it's almost imagining who are those individuals that are clicking the download and then using that to determine what is important. And then once you've determined who that audience is, you then need to draw out what your key message is, which is really what's the one-liner. There'll be other secondary items, but it might be like continue funding this project or the initiative didn't work. Those are the key kind of statements that you want to be clear or quite explicit in the way you present in your infographic. And when you create an infographic, there's a bit of a rule that you're allowed to break, because in research, we're often taught to structure how we present information with like the background, the method, the analysis, and then you go to results and conclusion. But an infographic, because the purpose is to ensure you're driving home a message, you flip that. And so we call this an inverted pyramid, which some like research, if you're a researcher, you may cringe because it's like, actually, that's not the way we do it. But this is a common journalistic style. Of course, there are ways of being irresponsible about it, but we will do this in a responsible way, because you can use this approach to kind of highlight, oh, we only want them to see the good thing, and then you only show the good data. Whereas actually the responsible way is to draw out the key message or key lesson, and that becomes the headliner. And then following that, so at the top, that's your lead, which is like who, what, when, how, upfront. And then you have the detail that follows. So it might be, our project was a success based on these key factors, and then the data supports that. So your data must speak to that. Or it might be, these are the common trends that we need to resolve in our policies. And then this is the actions. And then you have your detail, your methods, and all of that becomes secondary. It's not saying excluded, but actually prioritize where I need to spend my time. It's like the red robot again. And then you make choices around your data. So it means that if I've got a full data set, I know this is my message, this is my audience, looking at it then only and saying, actually, which pieces of this data tell me the story or draw the key message. And so you only focus on those pieces, not going through every single piece of data. The second step is then for you to create. So at the point of creating, you now have an idea of like, okay, so I'm creating an infographic to show the success of or the lessons of a key initiative for a funder. And I know that I'm going to use my financial data. I'm also going to use some data that's about the outcomes. I'm going to remove all of the demographic stuff, perhaps. So now you create, and when you create, you're looking at what's the medium that I need to use for this audience? Is it going to be somebody that looks at their messages while they're driving to work on their phone? Hopefully they're not the driver. Or is it going to be somebody that you're meeting, you're sitting in a meeting and presenting online? Or it's somebody that I'm going to hand a piece of paper to. So you need to look at like, what's the practicalities of getting that information to the person? And then you start building out the heading. So if we have a message, you want some sub messages. Build out your headings and then build out what your data looks like to support it. So just showing you that these are some tools that, and I've shared things that are either free or low cost. So you can actually create amazing infographics in PowerPoint, but it does require a bit more creativity. And so at least for this, you can link it to your data sets. It's easy to navigate. And there are more design elements than they've previously included. And then secondly, there's PictoChart. So PictoChart and Visma are two very similar tools. They have a free option. So I would suggest you go like sign up for the free one to experiment. The helpful thing about this is that they've already got templates structured. And if you want an interactive infographic, you can embed a PictoChart or Visma infographic on your website or other platforms. So it allows you to kind of hover over and add add a few other interactive elements. They also give you a lot of like additional things like a stock photo library, an icon library, and it's pretty user friendly. So we're unfortunately not going to go into that right now, but at least you have a sense of tools you can use. Visma is also a really great tool. And the other benefit is that they give you structures that are both for web format, for report, presentation format. And then lastly, there's Canva, which you may be familiar. Most of the time we use Canva for social media posts because it has the dimensions for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So it becomes easy for you then without having design software, you've already got the dimensions set out for you. But it also has useful and some animated infographic elements that you can use there. But Visma and Pictochart have better kind of report or long or lengthy infographic formats that you can use. So that's the mediums that you could utilize, and you would then decide based on your audience. Oh, yes, please go ahead, Christelle. If you have other tools that you use, do share that as well. Awesome. And then you go into your headings. So with headings, you need to choose based on your key message, what are the subheadings that you need to create? So in this case, this is just a sample of something. They've like tactics to make your advertising plan a success. So key message up front, and then they've broken it down. These are the things you do: research, audit. So you start designing firstly, what are your subheadings before you put the content in. So you have a main heading, text, and subheadings. And then you start looking at, okay, so if this is the structure of my infographic, what is the type of data that I need to include, and how will I present that data? So this is just kind of a summary of some considerations around your data. So often we'll look at, okay, is my key message showing me how things have changed? Then I need to present a comparison of values. Is it showing a comparison perhaps between gender, groups, location? Do I need to show what has happened over the past few decades? So then I need a trend or an analysis of trends. In some cases, you may need to show composition. And so you'll need to have a visualization that speaks to that, or distribution over different areas or relationships. So really your key message informs what are then the sub kind of groups of information and what are the themes that I need to present. And so it is again quite important that you make these choices based on the need, not like the preference. Some people love bar charts, and so then everything is a bar chart. But actually, is a bar chart useful if I want to demonstrate, a relationship between two variables? Of course, that it is not. It may be more helpful to show a comparison and use that. I've included a link at the top. You'll see datavizcatalog.com, where it's got quite a lot of helpful kind of groupings and various. So it gives you a catalog of types of visualizations and the different tools that you can use to create those visualizations. So in your infographic, you could use something like Pictochart or Poster. I see postermywall.com, but then you can incorporate DataViz from other tools as well. So you can either embed it or you can export and then place them in the infographic. Okay, so then your third step in creating the infographic is that you then start improving. So this is around eliminating the clutter, focusing on what your audience, where do you want your audience attention to be focused. And so what we do here is that we look at things like alignment, color, font size, and images, as these are like enhancements to my infographic. So this is just a quick picture of what alignment means. So most of us, we often are reading kind of left to right, or we read top to bottom. And so when you structure your content, even the way you structure it is important for me to follow through, because I make an assumption if it goes left to right, that's the sequence of events. If that is not your story, if your story is like, this is the key point, here's the result, then make sure that you've organized information in such a manner that it's flowing in that pattern. So on the left, you'll see it's kind of, you can use grids. And in the Ebola example, you see that it's grids and I follow down and then I move to the next page. And so you must have a very kind of clear structure there. Whereas when your structure of your infographic is disconnected, it's almost a little bit irritating to the eye. And I'm not clear because this starts on the left here, but that starts on the top. I somewhat want to start reading over here instead of going there. So make sure that it's organized for my visual perception of like, where do I start? Where do I go next? And then color is also an important factor, because color, again, I make assumptions about color. If I see red, I automatically assume that either that is negative or I must draw attention there. And so if we use, it's a bit difficult. If your brand is red, then of course you need to look at a secondary palette to use. But it's important to then either identify, do I use or a gradient? Because where I see dark, it means that all of these must be the same versus light, that it's changing. So color is both useful to help categorize, but it's helpful in adding kind of a theme. Because if I know, okay, red is bad, green is good, then that is helpful, because automatically when I look at information, I'm like, okay, all of these areas over here I need to draw attention to. Another helpful tool for you to look at is coolers.co, because if you're not great with creating color palettes and identifying the right color, or if you're aware that you have an audience with a color blindness, it allows you to identify colors that will be more useful. So that's one tool over there that I've put at the top. And this is just kind of a sneak peek of how we would pull it all together. So on the left is an example of kind of, we're presenting to a funder, and we wanted to show them kind of just the demographics of a study. And what we've done is we've used bar charts, and we've also included both gender and age. But you'll see this is quite messy. That one, maybe this is not the right chart that we've chosen. Two, we've included information that's not helpful. And we've included unnecessary things. In this case, I don't really need to have this many lines and this blank. So the improvement you'll see is that we've used a stack bar, but we've also used color so that we can draw focus to certain things. And actually, the thing that's more important is this age group. It's not even the gender helps me, but actually 12 to 14 years, there's something I need to think about there. And I've already provided some key pieces of information, like more cohort participants were 12 to 14 years old. So I've already guided you there, whereas in the first version on the left, I have to kind of do a bit of a calculation, or I have to mentally place these bars on top of each other and then say, okay, in total, there are more 12 to 14 years old. And then we've also incorporated icons and lines to help. You'll see the lines help me follow the direction. Okay. And then the last step is emphasizing. So this is where you're like, okay, I've put all my content together. Now it's really like doing the last look as a designer. It's looking at overall, have I used space appropriately? Have I incorporated sufficient text to add to the context? Have I used shapes and icons to make sure that I'm compartmentalized? And is there actually a call to action for the audience that I started with? And so these are a couple of highlights that you need to think about. So it's firstly highlighting the important stuff. So you could use either text attributes to do this, such as bold, or using a different color. You can eliminate distractions by taking things, which is a rule some people are not also keen on breaking, but you can remove your grid lines if you've already incorporated, you've got your data headings already. And then also making it accessible. So making sure that actually, have I considered that my audience may include a colorblind individual? Is it the right colors that I've utilized for them to interpret the differences? Are my icons actually relevant to the context that I'm working in, such as gender, disability icons? So this is where you do that sense checking. Here's just an example of how you could use text in different ways. So there's no attributes, it just looks like a paragraph. But if it's bold, my attention is drawn to the question. If it's underlined, I go straight to the bottom and see what's that point, or using color again. So this is helpful, especially when you've got a lot of qualitative information, and then you can use this as a means to still highlight information in your infographic. And this is just an example of the use of space. When things are quite clustered, it's hard to then visually group information. So it's both the use of space and color, but by adjusting the space, my attention is again drawn to the key point at the top. It's also a different chart type. And then lastly, there's the use of icons. So on the right-hand side, you'll see we've got some examples where you can access icons. Sorry. So Microsoft does have an option for various icons, but what I find, if you if you want to get contextually relevant icons, my apologies. Sometimes, if, for example, if I'm looking for an icon on like socioeconomic development or WASH initiatives, Microsoft won't provide the appropriate things there, but I do find that the Noun project and Flight icon do have more contextually relevant type icons that you can access, and some of them are for free. So that's the other great thing. And just as an example, so this is a case where you often, you know, when we're creating an infographic, it's both for qualitative and quantitative data presentation. And these are icons are helpful when you've got a lot of qualitative data, because it allows you to package the detail, like maintain the qual, but create visual themes in your infographic. So for example, this person writing the report is typing, the key factors inhibiting schools from acquiring computers are absence of electricity, lack of funding, insufficient building, lack of available and trained staff, and poor security. And then in the infographic for each of it, they talk about it. They explain, these are the challenges and lessons for funding. Here's the challenges and lessons for poor security. So rather than repeating these as headings, you can utilize icons. Here's just examples of flat icons. So I know wherever I see this plug point, it's referring to electricity issues. Wherever I see the money bag, it's referring to funding. And then you can overlay color as well, because you can choose that, okay, whenever it's a green icon, it's representing a success or a lesson. Whenever it's a red icon, it's representing a challenge or a negative situation. Or you can choose whichever colors make sense. So you can overlay and use icons to help build out how I interpret my infographic. And then lastly, there's the delivery. So when you look at how you've placed all your content, you can look at, have I placed it in either chronological order? Am I telling the story of time, or am I telling the story of a lead and ending? And so often we are focusing on the lead and ending, but there are times where actually within my infographic, I need to ensure that it's a chronological, like there's a start and an end, that there's a process that I'm following. So there's a bit more detail on that, but I'm going to jump through to the last point so that we at least have 5 minutes to engage on the use. So what I've shared with you now is like the steps that you would follow, and I'm happy to share those steps so that when you're creating your infographics, you can then test out those different tools and use your own sources of information to try and build up an infographic. But now that we've done that, so you now know how to create an infographic, and you also know how to potentially use an infographic. Let's just talk about some examples of this. So as I mentioned, the kind of key thinking process to creating is like first making the right choice, creating based on the appropriate medium and display, improving that, emphasizing, and then ultimately delivering it. And I will share this information via the network, but my email is at the top. We do have a more detailed program where we spend time on each step. And this is just some of the details of that. If you're interested in participating, you can contact me on jerusha@datainnovators.co. No M. So first, in terms of use, this is an example of infographic that we created where it was really part of a package. So it's just sharing that often the use of an infographic is great as a complementary piece. So this was really a summary that was as an attachment to a report. So in this case, you're like, these are the 5 key takeaways from digital ecosystem stakeholders, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And you'll see it's very explicit that that's what we want. We want you just to look at the takeaways. We don't need you to worry about the methodology or the details. And we've provided the 5 key things that you need to think about and the supporting data over there. This is a 2-pager, so there's detail, there would be detail on the other side. This was part of an attachment with a report. So when it was disseminated, there was a detailed about 100-page report, but then there was an infographic that was at the top. So for the executive or for the high-level person, I just want the key pieces of information. I could access it, but then if I wanted the detail, I could then access the detail as well. So this is one use case where the audience was actually the broader stakeholders within the digital ecosystem. So it was quite a broad audience. This is another example where it's used again as a summary. So infographics are often utilized as summarization and, when you have the detailed report. And this was part of a series. So it allowed me to have a picture of Namibia, a picture of Ghana, a picture of South Africa. And then lastly, which is a bit hard to see, I'm sure, infographics are really helpful with kind of consolidating detailed process. So aside from delivering data and a key story point, it can also take you kind of on path. So this is an example of, it's a component of a more detailed infographic where there's a chronological order. It's very detailed, where there are themes, there are steps. So each color represents an area. Each of these circles represent a key point in a set of activities. And then you'll see the colors around it represent an audience. At each stage, there are some sub-activities, and so there are icons associated and numbers associated with it. So it's almost like a game, but it's meant to allow you to see the complexity of multiple processes in a single space. So I'm going to allow for some questions while we're ending, because I know that we are nearing the last minute. But that is a kind of introduction to how to use infographics for data communication. And if there are any questions, please can you drop them in the chat, and I'm happy to respond. Otherwise, my email address is at the top over here. So I'm also happy to respond to your emails. So I'll pause for a moment there. Thank you. Thanks, Christelle. I will share a copy of the slides. It might be a bit truncated, but happy to share. Okay, so I'll respond to the one question before we are closed. So sorry, I'm going to jump through all of my slides, which is a terrible way of doing that. Okay, I'll briefly share that. So we do offer a program called Data Artistry Program. There are 3 different modules that we cover, and each of them are either 2 days in person or 3 days virtually. It's first on introduction to data communication, and then there's creating an infographic where we go in depth. There's also creating a dashboard, and these are offered in-house. So how it's done is that if you're interested in this, you can share our information, my email, with your organization, or with yourself, you can inquire with me, and we do provide tailored. So we use our current content, and these are adapted to your organization's needs, so that we walk you through a journey of creating that infographic with your organization, or creating a dashboard, for example. And so if you're interested, you can contact me on my email, and we can share the costing, because we have set package costs for the Data Artistry Program as well. Okay, I don't see any further questions. Brief video guides. So we have a how-to guide, which I will share. But currently we have like snippets of videos. We do have a platform called Data Heroes, where we've got some content as well. So I'll disseminate that to the network as well. I note that. Okay, on that note, I think we can close the session. Thank you. Please reach out if there are any other questions.